Okay, hello. This is my lecture on J.S. Mill. Quite a very interesting fellow. He was quite the philosopher, and he also wrote a very interesting essay called What is Poetry? It's just really, really very interesting, and I hope that everybody learns more about this amazing gentleman. This is who he is, and this is the overview for today's lecture. I did want to give a definition of terms, some information about his background, some things that influenced him, contributions, his writing, and certainly some final thoughts. So as you can tell, this is the gentleman here, probably in his later years. He does have a bit of the typical Victorian style dress with the tie and the suit and everything. And that is what he looked like way back in the day of the 1800s. Okay, so we're going to start off with our definition of terms. Soliloquy. This is a term that is commonly used in drama, and he does use it in his essay, What is Poetry? Basically, the definition is an act of speaking one's thoughts aloud when by oneself or regardless of any hearers, especially by a character in a play. You see this in drama all the time. Fundamental. To be fundamental. This is going back to basic information to form the basic core. If you're taking a developmental class in math, a lot of times people call that the fundamentals of mathematics. Just an example. Coerce. To convince using force or threats. Not a kind thing to do, generally speaking. Eloquence. Very often eloquence is referred to as something being elegant, but what it generally means is that you're fluent in speaking and or writing. Other definition of terms. Melancholy, feeling sad, a state of pensive sadness. You're reflecting on that sadness in some way, shape, or form. Utilitarian, or basically to utilize, designed to be useful or practical rather than attractive. Utilitarian. Malaise, feeling of illness or discomfort, not feeling very, very good. Benevolent, being kind, friendly, meaning well. Omnipotent, ultimate power, all powerful. Those are some terms that many people may not know. To give some information on this gentleman's background, he was born in 1806 close to London, knew Latin and Greek very, very well, spent some time in France, not too surprising there, was married to Harriet Taylor. He was very, very much in love with her. In fact, the two kind of knew each other when she was married before. From what I've read at Stanford's site, her previous husband also allowed them to visit as friends, but they were still kind of connecting with one another. He was very much in love. Maybe through that relationship, he felt or started to feel that women should be more equal in that time period than they were. The 1800s, Victorian England, that was a totally different time with a totally different perspective. Women should be more equal, at least in his eyes. Buried next to his wife. Some influences. Goethe, German writer and statesman. Jeremy Bentham, he is well known in the realm of philosophy as well, an English philosopher associated with the same tradition. It's known that Mr. Mill has edited a lot of Jeremy's writing, so that's interesting. Tocqueville, French historian and politician, and Wordsworth was also a huge influence on him. Wordsworth is an English romantic poet, and keep in mind this is around the time of the Romantics as it was. Contributions. He actually made a lot of very interesting contributions to many realms, including logic, what we know about inductive reasoning. Didn't necessarily start with him, but he made a lot of contributions to this area. Inductive reasoning, of course, goes way, way back, thousands and thousands of years, but he did use it and was a fan of it. Liberty. He was very, very big into freedom of speech. He also held equal rights for women, and he definitely did not approve of slavery at all. Did not approve of it at all. In fact, I do have a selection I would like to read. This isn't on the PowerPoint in and of itself, but it's something very interesting. In Mill's essay from 1869, he wrote an essay from 1869, The Subjection of Women. In this essay from 1869, he expressed his opposition to slavery. He says here, this absolutely extreme case of the law of force, condemned by those who can tolerate almost every other form of arbitrary power, and which of all others presents features the most revolting to the feeling of all who look at it from an impartial position, was the law of civilized and Christian England within the memory of persons now living, and in one half of Anglo-Saxon America 3 or 4 years ago. Not only did slavery exist, but the slave trade and the breeding of slaves expressly for it was a general practice between slave states. Yet not only was there a greater strength of sentiment against it, but, in England at least, a less amount either of feeling or of interest in favor of it. So very interesting thing that he says here. I'll repeat that. Yet not only was there a greater strength of sentiment against it, but in England at least, a less amount either of feeling or interest in favor of it than of any other than any other of the customary abuses of force, for its motive was the love of gain, unmixed and undisguised, and those who profited by it were a very small numerical fraction of the country, while the natural feeling of all who were not personally interested in it was unmitigated abhorrence. Essentially, he's saying slavery is not nearly as popular, at least in his eyes, as it was, and he's was very much against slavery. Writing. Well, I found this interesting piece, What is Poetry? It's very, very philosophical, but it does explain clearly what poetry is. He also edited notable works of others, very interesting point that Mill did that, and he wrote many essays himself, one of which I just quoted part of. Final thoughts. Well, some good questions to ask. Would the notion of logic have advanced as much if he wasn't around and didn't make these contributions? Don't know, but that's a good thing to say, or a good thing to question. What about women's rights? He was very much in love with his wife, and I think that influenced his point of view a lot, and he definitely stood up for women more than a lot of other people in the 1800s. And certainly, I personally believe he was ahead of his time. Few other things to note, some references. What is poetry? You can read that at the University of Texas's website. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is a very, very, very good place to go if you want to learn about any philosophers whatsoever. Okay, well, due to all the crisis with the coronavirus, I will do some other presentations on mainly the flu of 1918. I think some people need to learn about that. But for today, this is the information on Mr. Mill. I do hope you enjoyed it. Have a good day.